And when I often ask speakers, what do you want me to specifically mention? Should I mention that you were at Adaptive Path? Should I mention that you wrote a book on gestural interfaces? Should I mention this or that? And Dan was sort of like, I don't care. So what I'm actually going to mention is that besides the fact that directly from the bio that Dan's the son of a plumber and a psychologist, and he feels the interaction design he does is a little bit of both, which I think is a great line. I more wanted to just say that this book, Microinteractions, which I had the pleasure of reading an early copy of for my editor, Ed O'Reilly, who's also Dan's editor, Mary Tressler. And towards the end of the process, she said, would you like to write a blurb for the book? And I was like, sure, I know that I won't get the jarred spool place on the back, but I might be included inside, which is nice. And then I went through the notes I'd written in my review, and I didn't have to write a blurb because I'd actually written it. In my final remarks, I just literally copied word for word what I wrote, which was that I've never before seen a book drill down to this level of detail into how interactions, let alone micro-interactions, actually work. It's one of the better books on interaction design I've read. I'm going to give copies to my designers and product managers and require that they read it and explain it back to me. And I'm going to follow through on that. Not my signed copy, but I'll get more copies for them. So I'd like to introduce Dan Saffer. Please give him a big hand.
Thank you, Christian. So I'm Dan Saffer, and I was inspired to write this book. It's been something I've been thinking about for a couple of years, and the thing that really pushed me over the edge was a couple of years ago when Apple decided to remove Save As from its operating system, and I was furious about it. And I said, why would you do this? And then I kind of turned it inward and said, well, why are you so angry about it? And the reason was really that I started thinking about it, like, well, an operating system is just a collection of all these little tiny things that all work together, and if you change one of them, it makes this huge difference to your workflow. And then I started looking around and saying, wow, that's true of a lot of different things, that the difference between a product that you really like and one that you don't like are all these little things about it. It's not always the big features. So that's what inspired this talk. But I'm going to start with a little story. So this is Avery Fisher Hall. For those of you who don't know it, it is a premier concert venue in New York City. It is one of those places where the patrons spend thousands and thousands of dollars and wait for years and years to get those seats down in the orchestra. And I'm going to take you back to it was about a year and a half ago. It was like a cold Wednesday night in January, and this is what was playing, the music that you're hearing, which is Mahler's Symphony No. 9. So Mahler's Symphony No. 9, as you can hear, is a very slow movement, a very kind of adagio piece. It takes about an hour to perform, and nearing the end of the hour, it has this very kind of grave moment, and it resolves this kind of hour of listening music, and the audience sitting there very quietly, very rapt, listening just as you are right now. And then this happens. And it keeps going and going and going. I'll silence it for you so that you don't have to hear. But so it just keeps happening, and the orchestra stops. The conductor stops the orchestra. People start yelling. People stand up and scream, and they're like, And finally, they figure out that it was this gentleman in the front row that the Avery Fisher Hall decided to call him Patron X to protect his identity, to keep people from having retribution against this guy. So poor Patron X was an older businessman who was a symphony patron, and he had front row seats, and he was just as pissed off as everyone else when the ringing happened, because he was like, who's the jerk doing this? And it turns out he's the guy doing it. But his company had changed his BlackBerry for an iPhone the day before. And he assumed that when he turned the ringer off, that it turned off all of his alarms, which of course it did not. So, but this is interesting because as soon as the story started to spread, people started to really started to kind of pick up on it. So composer Daniel Dorff said, "Oh, I changed my ringtone to Mahler 9 just in case." And then people started to debate like whether the ringer should actually turn off your alarms or not. So there were some people that definitely said, you know what, when I turn the ringer off, that should be it. That should be the end of everything. It's my fault if I turn it off and go to sleep. So other people were like, no. If that happens, then everyone would wake, would oversleep because most people go to bed and they have the ringer off and they don't realize it, and and you just wouldn't know. You'd oversleep because your alarm wouldn't go off. So what I think was interesting about this is that it's one of the kind of only instances of where something like a microinteraction like really makes news and is really and really like pops up into people's consciousness, and they start debating what the microinteraction is. And so when I read the story, I was like, oh, it just illustrates that microinteractions, despite being almost really invisible, they are these kind of incredibly important things. And so what are microinteractions? So then I said, well, what are they? So to me, microinteractions are a piece of functionality that does one thing, and it does it well. They're these very contained, very short product moments, and they're all around us in our devices, in our apps, in our phones. They're everywhere. And as I was saying, the difference between a product that you love and one that you're just simply tolerate are often the microinteractions that you have with it. They can make our lives easier, they can make our lives more fun, more productive, if they're just done well. Over the last 10 years or so, designers have been told to really think big, to think broad, to tackle these really systematic problems, everything from large systems to cities to complicated ecosystems of products, all these kind of wicked problems. But I think that there's another way to work, and that's really to focus on these details that delight. And I think sometimes by working at such a macro scale that we forget that all the human moments, all the human stuff is kind of at this micro scale. That the things that we really love, like a beautiful click, or a really satisfying curve, or a really neat animation, or a really understandable mental model, all these things happen at a micro level. And that's hard to accomplish when you're working at such a very large scale. And I think that working at a large scale isn't the only way to work. I mean, it's certainly good to keep that big picture in mind and work at these different levels of products. But I think that there's another way to work, and that's really to change the world from the bottom up, to really focus on these small details that really can have really meaningful, tangible results. And I think this is something that we as designers can do really well. So what are microinteractions? So we trip over them all the time. These are the kind of interactions that we overlook. We save it to last. We do as an afterthought, when they could really be these thoughtful moments of delight. Everything from setting a status message to logging in to changing a setting, all these things. And when you start to look around, you start to see them everywhere. So this is just an example of my menu bar on the thing. And every single one of these is a trigger for some kind of microinteraction. You can also find microinteractions in things like that just power your apps, right? That these are something like ConvertBot. I mean, it does one thing and it does it really well, and it does it in this really delightful way. It's a microinteraction powered app. A lot of our devices are also kind of microinteraction devices, things like a toaster, right? I mean, the toaster does one thing really well. It toasts, and this Breville toaster, for instance, does it really well in that there's an awesome button on this thing that when your toast pops up and you need it to be a little bit more toasted, there's actually a button that says a little bit more. And you press it and it toasts a little bit more. It's great. So microinteractions are good for a number of different things. Everything from accomplishing a single task like setting a volume, to tying ecosystems together, to working with little pieces of data, to adjusting settings. Turning an on-off switch is usually one of the first microinteractions that people even have with your product. And here are just a couple really simple examples. So on Facebook, when someone posts on your wall for in a language that's not yours, it pops up this little "see the translation." It's smart enough to recognize, hey, this is not your default language. Things like the high-rise iPhone app, while you're downloading, it gives you a game of tic-tac-toe to play while you're waiting for the download. I mean, it's kind of stupid, but it's also like really kind of engaging. It's something to do while you're waiting. This is a really nice one from Mountain Lion, so that when you trigger the speech and dictation dialogue, it actually lowers the volume of the fans. It turns the fans down so that it doesn't affect when you're doing speech and dictation. If it would be remiss of me not to talk about, since we're here at Park, I think the history of technology is also really about the history of microinteractions that frame and manage and control them. And as technologies have changed, the microinteractions that support them have also changed. So all of these things were once, kind of novel microinteractions, cut and paste. Thank you, Larry. All these tiny little things that we interact with every day on desktops, on laptops. These were all things that no one had thought of before, and someone had to design them. Our operating systems are just a collection of these micro interactions, whether they're mobile or desktop or whatever. They all do basically the same things. They all, install and launch apps. They manage files. They connect hardware and software. All these things. But the difference in our operating systems is all about the micro interactions. And you can even see things like scrolling, for example. You can see the evolution of the scroll bar as it goes through time. And you can even see, look how thin the scroll bar gets when you get to starting to have touch and stuff like that at the end. So what's the difference between microinteractions and features? So features for me are much longer in duration. They require a lot more cognitive skill. There's multiple use cases around them. They just require a lot more effort on the part of the user to manage and do. Meanwhile, microinteractions, they're shallow, they're thin, they're often forgettable, and they're frequently overlooked. Like, people sometimes don't, you're not ever buying a product usually for the microinteraction. No one wants to log in, but they have to do it in order to get in. So why care about these things? So my argument is that if you care about the user experience, you need to care about microinteractions. Your product is really only as good as the worst microinteraction that you have with it. Because if the microinteractions themselves are poor, then the main features, no matter how nicely done these other features are just can be surrounded by this pain and frustration. Like, I liken it to like the pebble in the shoe effect. The shoe can be awesome, but if there's this really annoying thing that happens over and over again, you're going to be very upset about it and not like that. I think this was the problem with the very first Android devices, the G1 device. I mean, the features worked fine. I mean, you could make a call, you could text, you could do all these things, but the micro interactions were a little wonky. Things like the back button took you to random places, and sometimes the search button didn't work, and all these kinds of things that would just made it feel unfinished. And I think experience design is all about this ability to work at multiple levels. So not only can you look at the overall product strategy and the overall product vision, but also you can drill down into these details and make this kind of holistic product experience. The other reason to really care about microinteractions is this idea of signature moments. So, so a lot of signature moments are things that we deal with all the time. So if you think back to the Facebook example, there was a major signature moment staring at us the whole time, and I'm sure staring at us, most of the people in this room all day, which is the like button. I mean, that is a signature moment for them. That is a tiny microinteraction that has become part of their brand. You can't really escape it. And then you can really design for these signature moments, these little things that really make a big difference. This is a product that we did called Ethicon that was for surgeons, and there was a little signature moment that we designed into it.
While surgeons use the audio feedback from the machine to actually improve how they use the tools.
It's very intuitive. The tone tells you when to stop, when to start, when you're actually in a sweet zone. So it kind of guides you through the surgical procedure. And then you hear the last tone, it tells me I'm done.
It saves them time because they know exactly when to start cutting. Sometimes they even sing along with the final chime at the end.
So if you can get surgeons to sing along with the thing, you're doing something right? I mean, and we didn't quite realize that it was just going to be this powerful, and it was an awesome microinteraction. The last thing I want to say about microinteractions is that I think one of the nice things about them is that they do fit super well into our multi-platform world. Small interactions work great on small devices, and now we're surrounded by small devices everywhere that we turn. Everything from our dishwasher to things embedded in the walls to things in our pockets, wherever we go. I mean, something like Twitter is a great example of something that started with a small microinteraction has really scaled all the way up to multiple, you can tweet from any device you can think of. So how do we do it? So hopefully now I've convinced you that these are worth thinking about and worth doing. So how do we go about actually making microinteractions? So I've come up with a little structure here that I think a lot of microinteractions really fit into, and each one of these different parts of the microinteractions model, a trigger, rules, feedback, loops, and modes, I think each one of these is a different dial that you can twist if you've got a microinteraction. You can mess with the trigger, which is the thing that initiates the microinteraction. You can adjust the rules, which are the kind of the interaction design part of a microinteraction. The rules basically define what happens. Feedback is what tells you what's going on, and that's obviously something you can adjust. And then loops and modes are the meta framework around the microinteraction. Is there a mode? Is there a loop that makes the microinteraction recur over time? And we'll walk through each one of these individually. So the first part of any microinteraction is the trigger. So the trigger is basically what happens when what happens to get the microinteraction started. What begins the microinteraction? And there's two kinds of triggers. There's a manual trigger and a system trigger, and we'll talk through each. So manual triggers are the ones that we're the most familiar with. I push a button, something happens. And so the question here is, what's the proper control for this context? What is the thing that people are going to recognize as a trigger in this context? Is it an icon? Is it a button? Is it a knob? Is it a dial? Is it a link? What is it? Here's some just examples of some manual triggers. So the camera on iOS, and it's also on Windows Mobile, works a little bit like this too. You press the camera, and this little thing at the bottom bounces a little bit, tells you, okay, boom, you can slide up and get to your camera. Things like forms can also be a microinteraction. This is from Discus. So Discus basically guesses your name as you start putting in you ask your email address first. So if you're Jacob at whatever, it guesses that your name is Jacob before you even have to start writing it. You can also have some invisible triggers that are manual triggers. So this is Ask-A-Met. So if you right-click on the logo on Ask-A-Met, it brings up this this little panel down here at the bottom. It says, hey, you looking for the Ask Emmett logo? Here it is. It's something that you otherwise would never have discovered, but it's there just in case you want it. It's not called out anywhere, but it's only for people who are looking for the logo. And this is the latest in invisible triggers. So with Google Glass, you can either tap the side of the device to turn it on, or you can tilt your head up and get the thing to come up. So it'll be interesting to see how that behavior changes us all if we're walking around like this for a lot. I think manual triggers are of course great, and they're always going to be with us. I think really interesting stuff for microinteractions is all about the system triggers. And system triggers are things that happen when a condition is met. What happens when a certain set of conditions is triggered, and then it says, oh, okay, this microinteraction now starts. So the big question to ask here is, what can the system intuit about the user's need just from the user's behavior? What are the things that the system can say, oh my gosh, you're looking for something, or you're trying to do this thing, let me provide this microinteraction to help you along or accomplish what you want to do. So obligatory nest slide. So nest, you walk close to it, it brings up the temperature. You don't have to touch it, you don't have to turn it on. It just has a proximity sensor, and you get close to it, tells you the temperature, and then you can go adjust it as necessary. This is from a great app called Deliveries. So Deliveries, if you've got something in your clipboard and you open it up, it says, hey, I see you've got something in your clipboard, and it looks like a UPS tracking number. Do you want me to add it to my, do you want to add a new delivery? I mean, it's smart enough to recognize what it is and who it's from, and know that, hey, it guesses from your behavior that you're coming in with this thing, that there's something that it can provide you, so that you don't have to dive in deep and hunt around and add a new thing. It just guesses already. It's a great one from Instapaper. So Instapaper, if you're on the subway or reading in bed or something, and you're reading on your phone, and it starts to tilt a little bit, and then you jerk it back, it brings up this little thing that asks you if you want to lock the rotation, because it notices, hey, that you may want to lock the rotation because you keep jerking your phone back to its upright position. So it's a really nice thing that just notices your behavior without you having to go find some setting somewhere to turn it off. So there's a couple principles around microinteractions that I'll talk about from time to time, and this one's a great one for triggers, and it's about bringing the data forward. So I talked about how Save As bugged me. But this is another thing from Apple that bugs me a lot every time I look at it, which is Apple's weather app. It always says it's 73 and sunny, which is awesome. Maybe down here it's always 73 and sunny. In San Francisco, it's 62 and gray or whatever. But it's always it's just not accurate. I mean, they lost a great opportunity to bring the data forward here. And I swear that this is what happened with Windows Live Tiles. They bring the data forward, right? So if messaging, if everything's cool, there's a little smiley face. If there's something wrong, oh, you get the little frowny face for messaging. It says, this is not something's gone wrong. Maybe you need to tap into me to tell me what's happening. Google Chrome is another thing that brings the data forward. So if you've got downloads happening, it tells you how many downloads and what the progress is right from the launch icon. Just shows you it right there. And I love this one from TaskRabbit, the people that will go to your house and do your laundry for you. So with TaskRabbit, if you say, hey, I need someone to come in and do my laundry, it'll tell you like, oh, based on this, it's about $35. That's what other people are paying for it. So it tells you information that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. So that's triggers. So once a trigger is triggered, then the rules happen. Something happens, something begins. It engages it engages rules and a set of behavior that says, okay, here's what's happening. And the rules, they really determine, what can be done and what can't be done. They're the invisible constraints of the system. I don't really like to use the word rules, but I tend to think of them as like the rules of the game. How do I play the game with this micro interaction? And then, so the rules determine a whole bunch of things, and this is just a kind of a laundry list of some of the things that the rules can determine. Everything from what happens when I press the trigger to all the way down to what happens when the micro interaction ends, or when is the feedback delivered and how is it delivered, and any configuration of algorithms. All these kinds of things are all determined by the rules. So let's do a super quick example. So here's the rules of a lamp. So step one is when I turn on a lamp, I flip the switch, the light comes on, stays on till I flip the switch again. So it's pretty much the simplest micro interaction that there possibly could be. So, but when I add a motion detector to the lamp, well, okay, all of a sudden things start getting a little more complicated. So it starts asking like, oh, is there, is it a cat that's walking by, or is it a person? Maybe I don't want it to come on when there's a cat walking by. Maybe it's only for when a person comes by. Oh, and if someone does go by, keep checking every 10 seconds to see if someone else is there. Oh, if there's no movement and nothing's happening, then we shut the light off. So, and I think everyone in this room has probably been on the receiving end of these rules in a bathroom stall somewhere, where you're sitting there and the lights go out and you're frantically waving at the ceiling looking for the motion sensor somewhere. Things can get even
Turn
more
the switch on.
complicated with these kinds of
LifeX then
lights.
connects to your Wi-Fi network and blinks green when it's good to go. We've also finished the switching, dimming, and color changing controls. You can also use your phone to dim your lights.
That's my favorite part. Ooh, technology. Yeah, so this is another great. So this is an example of a really nice rule from Spotify. So that the rule really helps tie the Spotify ecosystem together. So if I'm listening to Spotify on my phone and I go turn on my laptop, it pauses my phone and starts playing, picks up right where I left off on the laptop. It's a really seamless micro interaction that's all about basically a hidden rule. Rules can actually help preventing errors and preventing bad stuff from happening. So this is from meetup.com. So if you enter in, if you're looking for something and it doesn't find it within your search parameters, it automatically expands the search parameters for you. It says, well, I couldn't find anything, but I'll expand it out. Rules can also prevent people from using your system in ways that you don't want them to. So this is what you love by Google. So if you put anything inappropriate into the search box, it returns kittens instead of whatever term that you put in there. So it really prevents any kind of abuse of the system. It's meant to be cuddly, not obscene. Rules can certainly also help us prevent human error as well. So doing things like, so for instance, so Google Mail, of course, has this famous thing like, so if you write, I've attached this file, blah, 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 and then you don't attach something, it brings this thing up and says, hey, I saw that you wrote attachment. Do you really want to, there's no files you want to send anyway. I mean, it's great. It prevents human error. It's a little creepy because you realize, hey, Google's reading all my mail. But it is very useful. The first time that it catches something from you, you're like, wow, this is a lifesaver. This is from makemeacocktail.com. So if you put in a no search terms and you just press search, it suggests a cocktail for you. It just assumes that you're drunk already and says, well, how about a mint julep then? It just picks a cocktail for you. It's not going to give you an error message. It just finds something for you. So another great principle around microinteractions is don't start from zero. There's almost always something that you know about the user or the context of use that can make the microinteraction better. There's almost always something you know, whether it's the time of day, where they are, the year, the month it is, the date, whether what platform they're on. There's almost always something that you know about them, and that can make your microinteraction better. So this is one of my favorite apps, Waze. And so Waze, when I come out of my building and get in my car at night, when I first launch it, it says, hey, are you driving home? It knows that if I'm coming out of my building and it's this time at night, I'm probably driving home because I've done it several times. It doesn't make me go into navigation and select home, it just offers it up. I can say no, I don't want that, but it saves me a step. This is I think it's Pro Flowers. This is so when you're clicking here to select the date to order flowers, it tells you like what big days are coming up. So I don't know who's ordering their dad flowers, but for Mother's Day, it could be really useful. There's also things like that it can just guess what it can just know from context what's going on. So this is GitHub, and so rather than making you select a credit card like 90% of every other sites do, it just guesses the credit card from the credit card number, because all credit card numbers, they start with a unique number, and so when it does that, it just selects Visa. You type a 4 at the beginning, it's a Visa card. So it just guesses from what you're doing more information. So that's the rules. So of course, rules are completely invisible. I mean, we don't really know what the rules of the game are unless the system and the microinteraction are actually telling us, hey, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. So feedback, or even the lack of certain kinds of feedback, allows us to learn what the rules of the microinteractions are. So so there's some, this is a really simple version of this. This is Twitter's password picker, and it really tells you, hey, what the rules are for picking a password. It says, oh, this one's pretty good, this one's weak, this one's strong, whatever. It offers really clear feedback on what the rules are around it. There are others that are a little more funny and interesting. This is MailChimp, which sends out, you can send out email newsletters. So if you start to stretch your email newsletter out too far, the chimp says, stop it, you're hurting me. And then if you stretch it too far, the poor chimp's arm actually pops out of the socket. And it won't let you do that. And you hurt the poor chimp. Rules and feedback doesn't have to obviously be visual. I mean, obviously there's some stuff that is also sound or haptics as well. This is from GE, their cafe line of products. So there's a lot of different kinds of feedback here. That's all sound. So lots of different sound cues for lots of different little microinteractions, and each one hopefully is trying to be this kind of thing that you'll remember and enjoy using over time. A nice principle for feedback is really to use the overlooked. As designers of interfaces, we often have a lot of tools at our disposal, a lot of tools that are already on our screens, things like scroll bars and things like cursors and other items that are already there. So it's great to look around and say, like, what could I use to convey this feedback without putting something else on the screen? So, so this is just a simple example from Coda 2, where it's just a button, and you press the button, process my order, and the button turns into a progress bar, which is great, although it would be better if it actually changed to like processing your order, or order done, process another. They could have taken that extra step to really make the text change, which I don't. If they went through all the trouble to make the progress bar. This is nice from Cornerstone. So when there's things working in the background, the spinner that tells you, hey, there's something working in the background, the number of parts of the spinner actually tells you the processes that are working in the background. So there's 4 things happening right now, so the spinner is actually in four different parts. This is another example from Chrome. So when you do a search for the word, it actually uses the scroll bar. It says, hey, here's where it is in the interface at these points on the scroll bar. And with iOS again, so things like the faster that the network is, the faster the spinner is that tells you when things are loading. It's just a really subtle cue that, hey, this is a little bit faster than this. Another principle for feedback is this idea of speaking human. So what are the, feedback is all for human beings. So what are the things that we can respond to as human beings just in general? So a really simple one is human beings respond to faces. So threadless, the shopping cart is sad until you put stuff in it, then the shopping cart is happy. Really kind of basic human psychology. Boxy is asleep when there's no network connection. He falls asleep. So there's that. This is how not to do it. So a little cutesy smiley face paired with a message that may not be all that great. You have no mail. Enjoy your day. Nobody likes you. So great. Another thing that people really respond to is just a little bit of humor, particularly when there's some kind of less than ideal situation happening. So this is Dropbox when there's this really long, time to download. It just tells you, oh, you better go grab a Snickers somewhere. This is Google Voice. So when you're typing an SMS, if the number if you put too many characters in, it's like, really? It just stops counting them after a while. It's like, wow, forget it. So I think a little bit of this definitely goes a long way, but it can make what would otherwise be a situation where you're being scolded or something bad has happened into something that's a little more human. And the last part of the microinteraction is all about loops and modes. This is kind of the part where you say, hey, what's the overall structure, and does it ever fold back into itself? So modes basically are to be avoided only for microinteractions unless one condition is met, where there's an activity that happens infrequently that would otherwise break the flow of the microinteraction. So just a simple example is entering where you'd like weather data from. It would otherwise, this could otherwise clutter up what could be, just a simple screen of glancing at it and being like, hey, here's the weather. It's nice to have this kind of separate from that. With loops, loops can detect things that happen over time. So it can say, wow, this has been going on a long time. If you're having trouble, this is from Ted, if you're having trouble viewing this video stream because it's buffering too long, hey, why don't you just download it later for other viewing? Loops can also act as counters, saying, whoa, this is something that's happening and is bad. So this is if you start to friend too many people too rapidly on Facebook. It says, hey, slow down, cowboy. You're making too many friends there. So a principle for for loops is this idea of using long loops. So what happens when someone returns to the microinteraction tomorrow, or the day after, or the 100th time, the 1000th time? How does your microinteraction evolve over time when you come back to it? So really simple, another Spotify example, when you add stuff to a playlist, the times that you start to add it start to fade and become grayer the more time that passes. With another Chrome example, so Chrome, when you get a new update, when there's an update to Chrome, it appears as this kind of greenish apple kind of up in the corner, but if you don't update, the apple starts to rot and turns this kind of ugly yellowish, like, your thing is way out of date. It can also help prevent things like preventing you from accidentally buying another one of these. So this is from eBay. If you've already bought an item, it changes the buy button to buy another. So hey, do you remember that you bought another? This kind of feedback, so this is the Ford Smart Gauge, which Smart Design also did. So these kind of leaves appearing are just a very kind of gentle, like ambient way to tell you, like, hey, you're driving really nicely over time. So over time, the branches over here start to get more and more leaves, but it's over time. This is the broken long loop of the web. Remember me. Okay, no one ever gets remembered, right? I mean, you check this box and you come back and it's never checked, or whatever. What happens if you actually do check that box? Does it actually, does it remember your name, or does it just log you in automatically? Like, what does it do? We'll never know, right? I mean, because no one ever remembers you. So that's the general structure of microinteractions. So how do we start to really incorporate this into our process? So the first thing is to really start to look for them. When you in the course of a project saying like, wow, there's this little login that could be something more interesting than what it currently is. Or it's like, hey, I've got this little volume control. Maybe this is something for like a signature moment. This is something that could be really memorable instead of being like really bland. So what could we do to make this really interesting and engaging? And then you basically look at the 4 steps and say, which one of these dials am I going to turn? Is it going to be a long loop? Is it going to be a new kind of trigger? Is it a new rule that we could add to this to make it more interesting? The other way of thinking about how to incorporate this is to really treat everything as a microinteraction. Treat your features as just a set of linked microinteractions that are all linked together. The trigger for one is the trigger for the next, and so on and so on. And you can really build your product based on just a foundation of all these details. You're going to polish everything all at once. And I think this is something that industrial designers have known for a long time. People like the Eameses, who said, the details are the design. People like Dieter Rams, who said his heart is in the design. The designs are more important than anything else. I think they know how to work this way, and this is something that should start to drift into the interaction design HCI world as well. And this is obviously this is hard. I mean, this is hard stuff because it takes time. You have to ask, and get and use that time really effectively, because polish just doesn't happen. I mean, sure, sometimes you can be like, hey, this would be a really great little piece of microcopy or something that could happen in there. But other times it's going to take extra time to make what you have really something special. But I think, to me anyway, the example that I started with the alarm going off in Avery Fisher Hall kind of just reminds us, hey, that this stuff does matter. It's really something that's worth our time, that's worth fighting for. And now that hopefully we have a word that we can use instead of like, oh, I want to fix that little thing. Now we can say, oh, I want to fix the micro-interaction. It sounds so much better, right? So it gives us another tool to say, hey, here's what I'd like to do. Because I think it matters, and I think that the details, when you spend time working on the details, it really shows that there is, that some care and some thought and some consideration has really been, some attention has been paid to the user when they're doing this, and I think that's something that people will feel and appreciate. And I think it's just a way that we can all just change the world from the bottom up. So thank you. That's it. Yes, I'll take some questions. We also have special giveaways. We'll intermingle.
Okay.
So question first, and then we'll give away some books.
Hi there, awesome talk. This is Albert, I'm a designer. So as a designer, I want to make every single micro-interaction in my product to be awesome. But in reality, you only have limited resource. So how do you choose which part of your product to have focus, have more resource to polish?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, how do you choose which micro-interaction to really focus on? And for me, it's all about like frequency of use. Like, is this something that everyone's going to bang into all the time, or is it something that's going to be buried pretty deep under a setting somewhere? And sure, sometimes the stuff way down in the settings can be a really cool kind of thing, but the more things that people are bumping into more frequently, that seems to be the thing that should get the most attention. Like, you know, what the most people use most of the time, it's kind of like, that's the thing. So if you can prioritize that, that's what I go after. So wait, the first book giveaway. So if you're paying attention, we'll give away some books. So who wants to tell me what the 4 parts of a micro-interaction are? Somebody pick. Someone else pick. Pick somebody near you. You're looking at notes?
The trigger, the loop, the rules, not in order, and the feedback.
Yes. Well done. Next question.
Yeah, I guess my question to follow up the previous one, how do you convince people who don't think micro-interaction is that important quickly into thinking that micro-interaction is actually important for the product?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, it all depends on your organization. I mean, there are, I've talked to people, and some of my reviewers for the book, some of my tech reviewers were like, you know what? I do micro-interactions all day, every day. This is what I do. I work on a web property, and that's all I do is polish this stuff. But in other companies, it's like, yeah, forget it. Like, like it's hard enough to get out just a big feature, much less being able to polish stuff. So there's a couple tricks to this. I mean, some people have told me that they like to bundle stuff together, and they just kind of include it as like, hey, this is an upgrade of polish and stuff like that, so they can tackle a number of them. So they seem more meaty when there's more of them. You know, like here's something that we want to do as an upgrade. And other times it's basically like sneaking stuff in. Like sometimes for some of our clients, we just finished this thing where there's a privacy button that you press. So we spent this little time making this little shade that drops down. Like it's a shade that drops down over your picture. Like, you know, it sounds like, whoa, boy, you know, but they loved it. It was like forget forget the feature, like the little window shade coming down was like the greatest thing. So sometimes it's just showing it, like, here's something that's really cool that we've been working on. Can we have a little more time to do stuff like this? So that's, sometimes it's yeah, it just depends on where you work, how you can get the time. So, sometimes it's, yeah, where can I slip it in to prove that it's worth doing?
Maybe change the name.
Change the name?
Killer Interactions.
Killer Interactions, yes. Wait, another question.
Thank you.
This time, this is for 2 books, Microinteractions and Designing for Interaction. So the questions now get harder. What was the code name of the person whose iPhone went off?
Patronix.
Yes. Good job.
First time BayCHI attendee.
Hi, when you're designing microinteractions for mobile in particular, and you want to leverage sort of the default of the operating system, and you don't think that those are very discoverable, how do you make a choice between what a user may or may not be familiar with and what you think you can do better?
Yeah. So this is, so one of the things I talk about, particularly around triggers, are like, when do you use like what is known, like here's the stuff that everyone's used to, and sometimes that stuff is not that great. So it's like then it's determining, like, if we change this, is there going to be like measurable instant like reward? Is someone going to be able to instantly tell, like, oh, it is so much better doing it this way? Because otherwise, especially for microinteractions, you want to use like the things that people are familiar with as much as you possibly can. But if you're going to change that, then you're starting to make things that are like, what we're calling kind of signature moments, like these things that are special just because people are going to like notice them in a way that they otherwise wouldn't. So, it's definitely pick those with care, and then it has to be just the value of it has just got to be super apparent of like why you're doing this. Because you don't want to get into that save as experience where it's like, you just removed something that was awesome. So, and replace it with something terrible. So yeah, so it's just figuring that out. There's no other better way to think about it. But all right, for all the marbles, for all 3 of my books, Microinteractions, Designing for Interaction, and Design Gestural Interfaces, what type of candy does Dropbox recommend you eat?
Snickers bar.
Yes, a Snickers. I hope they got money for that from Snickers. Like, anything else?
First of all, thank you for coming here.
My
you
pleasure.
showed us a lot of micro interactions that are, I want to say, kind of meant to be noticed.
Yeah.
By definition, do you have to notice a micro interaction?
No.
And, well, I was thinking back to the earlier question about prioritizing, or rather trying to sell the idea, to project teams, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a way that you could sneak it in, is to make it unnoticed, right?
Yeah, yes, sure. I think that there is definitely a balance between wanting to be noticed and wanting to be unnoticed. Like, I think you have to pick and choose which ones are worth people looking at. Because I don't want to notice my login all the time, or especially if it's giving me kind of a funny, edgy attitude when I mistype my password and it's like fail. Like, no, I don't want that all the time. I lost your question in the joke. But yeah, no, sometimes you can slip it in just quietly, but there are times like with Spotify, like the Spotify example where they just stop, pause your music here and start picking up there. That's pretty invisible, but I'm sure it required a hell of a lot of developer time to make that work that seamlessly. So, yeah, you can try, but I mean, because for some of these things, you're looking for that of course effect. Like, of course it works that way. Why wouldn't it work that way? But yeah. But I mean, stuff like the Snickers thing, that was like probably like one line of code, something super easy. So, I think it's all conditional.
So when I saw some of the interactions, I noticed that it basically, was some kind of affordance to something that you wanted to bring attention to. But I also noticed in a few of the examples, like in the Visa example, I'm like, well, why do we even have the icons in the first place? If it's gone to that much trouble of figuring out which is the right one, it's no longer a kind of a secondary function, so why care? And then in the passwords too, I'm like, by the time that you've typed in your password, like, I love my wife, and then you find out it's too short, now it's too late to really maybe come up with a better statement, because now you're like, I love my wife a lot, a lot, a lot, So I'm just wondering if how you feel about like the micro-interactions versus kind of maybe giving too much attention or too late attention to the interaction.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple parts to that. I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely, I mean, for me, I always err for microinteractions on the side of invisibility. Like, I want it to be as smooth and seamless as possible. I mean, so yeah, so maybe in the Visa example, like, yeah, maybe it doesn't show up, but it,
you have a Visa card.
or it just brings up a little bit of copy, yeah. And so many microinteractions in the book are all about like little bits of copy and how do you present copy and how do you provide just enough information to get you through the microinteraction, whether it's a label or like some kind of small piece of instructional text. So.
You have to have a mic.
In that example, it looked like the cards were actually showing what cards were accepted as well. So
well, there's
that's the
there's that. I was going to say there could be some other reason, like people were like, "Is this really working with my card?" Or
Usually you would have clicked it first.
Right. Right.
Usually you would have wanted to like click it first, so having it in that order.
Above, yeah.
Above makes you think.
Right. I have to do something with it,
yeah.
but yeah.
But that's not your point,
Yeah.
so I understand.
I didn't design it.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
You got anybody over there?
Anybody else?
I had somebody.
As a designer, do you feel like there's a tipping point between, when you're thinking through these interactions and building them out, there's a point between designing for the current state and designing for, to educate for a better use? So I know there's the phrase designing for desire. When do you take it upon yourself to say, what you currently know may be inefficient and I want to teach you a better way? So like with Apple's like Zoom feature, that's not how people were used to doing it, but I guess someone was confident enough to say people are going to love this. So what information do you need to decide that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to like, do you design with standards or not, or when to really break those standards? And yeah, I mean, I think with the like pinch to zoom example, like it shows its value like instantly. You see it and you're like, well, of course I want to do this all the time, everywhere. So I think I think that's the question. I mean, for the most of the time, I think you err on like using standards and being, using what people are familiar with to get them to this microinteraction. You don't want every microinteraction to be this ta-da thing. I mean, you need some of them to be very kind of under the radar. But there are these ones that sometimes you're like, wow, this could be really great. And then you have to convince people, like, both starting internally, like, hey, let's sell this to, to whoever's who's gonna make it, or who your client is, or the business owner, or whatever. And then you have to make sure that you're guessing right, through testing and stuff like that. So, and testing is a whole nother ball of wax with microinteractions because most people don't want to test this little tiny thing. So again, it's if you bundle enough of them together, or bundle them with a feature to test, sometimes sometimes that's the way to get it done. So I think it's just figuring out what is it you want people to notice? What do you want to be like again, the signature moment? What's the thing that you want people to remember versus people to just go through and breeze through?
So the save as debate is kind of fascinating. I'm just curious, is there actually a resolution to that? I mean, we know the journaling file system is not going away. And is it Apple's responsibility or the application writer's responsibility to do the micro-interaction?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it is a global, and they've since returned it under duress. So it's there. It's just hidden. So the question is how far do they want to backtrack to bring it back fully or not? There have certainly been things that they've done, like when they switched the iPad mute switch also used to be the rotation lock, and then they got rid of that. But then people went, I need the rotation lock, so they brought that back. So it's not like they're totally inflexible. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it's the developer's job to bring it back. I think it's got to, since it's so global and it's such part of people's workflow across multiple apps that removing it without a reasonable substitution workflow is a real thing. And I go into this in the rules chapter actually starts with me complaining about this for a page or two.
So when do micro interactions highlight a situation that you may not necessarily want to highlight? Like, I think, for example, back in the Windows days, there was that annoying chime. Like, if I did something with the interface and it chimed, it just made a situation worse. So I guess the question is, are there times when you should not use micro interactions?
That's a good. Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I know that there are plenty of examples where microinteractions can make a bad situation worse by giving wrong feedback, or I have a Bosch dishwasher that screeches in the middle of the night when it's done washing dishes, and it's like or the old jam boxes in the middle of the I once woke up and I was like, somebody's in the house, and it was my jam box. The battery was running down, and it was talking like, jam box almost out of battery, and you're like, going outside with a baseball bat. So I mean, they definitely can make things worse. So I actually talked to Karen Krishnowski, who's the interaction designer of Jambox, and she has a whole thing called like non-use cases. So there are times that you don't want things to happen. So like if there's no one on the moving walkway, you don't need to have the message like there's no one on the the walkway is ending, the walkway is ending. You don't have to have that kind of feedback. So I think there are times where, yeah, no micro interaction is better than a bad one. I've seen a lot of error stuff, and particularly, I mean, errors are such a great place to show personality. Like the Internet Movie Database, if it can't find anything, it brings up these error messages that are based on movie clips. There's like one from Indiana Jones. It's like error messages. Why did it have to be error messages? So I mean, there are times that it can be a really it can bring a lot of personality, but you got to be careful with it.
A bunch of the interactions you've been talking about seem to focus on very simple things or making things simpler. And you mentioned features as stringing together micro interactions. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the if there's any tension between sort of the power of simplicity and the sort of power of flexibility or features, and Microsoft Excel being at one end of that decision and some other things at the other end.
I mean, to me, everything about a micro interaction has got to be optimized for smart defaults that most of the people are doing most of the time. So if there's a lot of settings for your micro interaction, you're doing it wrong. Like, I mean, it's not like what they're designed to do. They're designed to be this thing that's going to help most people most of the time. So, so I kind of, I always err on that side. So, but then the question is, okay, is it this kind of perceived simplicity where where I've hidden everything away, or is it I bring everything out in the open to, there's 50 buttons in a row. And that's a huge philosophical debate. And for micro interactions, for me, it's like, well, get rid of all those choices. Make sure that any choice that's going to be made is a meaningful choice, and determine that. And then those are the only choices that you should actually be presenting at any point in a micro interaction. Like something that's really going to change the whole tenor of the micro interaction, not these little, not these meaningless settings. So, but that being said, there are things like the start button is a micro interaction that shows a lot of things, and when they got rid of that, that was a big deal. So, they were trying to be more visually simplistic and lost the perceived simplicity, and so I don't know. It's a debate that will rage for all time. So.
That's no debate. I think we have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to hog one myself. Just your story about the Jambox reminded me that every time I'm at Oakland Airport and waiting for the sign to cross, the crosswalk sign, for, I guess, blind people and people who aren't deaf, they have a voice that says, "Walk sign is on. Walk sign is on." And I was like, either an engineer wrote that, and to my mind, it's like it's a message that says, "We have engaged the turning on the walk sign subroutine." It's not a human message which would say something like, "You can walk now," or "Safe to walk," or "Walk," or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
But then over the years, I thought, well, maybe it's like a lawyer said, you can't tell people it's safe to walk. There might be a truck bearing down on them. So all you can tell them legally is that the walk sign is currently on.
There, yeah.
Now, maybe that's not true, but if it was the latter case, I think people have found that sometimes lawyers don't write the best message copy. And when you have constraints like that, where maybe somebody else who is governing what you're building has tied your hands in some ways or insisted on something that you feel is not going to be a great micro interaction, do you have any strategies for resolving those kinds of challenges?
Yeah, I mean, something like, the Snickers thing, like, I'm surprised that made it past anyone's lawyer. Like, we're not getting paid by Snickers. Why would you allow this? And, Snickers might sue us for copyright infringement or whatever it is. I mean, I hate these kind of it depends kind of answers. But clearly, I mean, there are things that you can do if you want to do some testing, you can do A/B testing. Hey, see how people respond to this, or, any kind of you can do simple qualitative testing as well. And, hey, everyone we talk to really likes this thing versus another. There's no, there's no silver bullet for this. I mean, people have been ruining designs for a millennium. So, so, I mean, we've all been in situations where someone outside the design team has come in and made changes that are not up to speed, not what we would want. So, we either use our charm offensive to beat them back, or we have to use hard data. This is preferred by users. Is there any way we can make this happen?
question number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about the need to mediate micro-interactions, especially ones that are invasive? You know, because I can imagine that in this world of, you know, people having thousands of apps on their multitude of devices, and you have this audience that's going to go and spread the great word about micro-interactions, and everyone's going to be doing it, everyone's going to be popping up messages and notifications here and everything like this. Is there a need at some higher level, say the operating system level, to mediate these things, to somehow control and limit the amount of, let's say, signals that we're getting?
Yeah, I mean, I get 3 different kinds of alerts on my laptop now. So it's like, you know, and sometimes they're for the same thing. So yeah, how do you prevent these kind of global micro interactions from taking over everything? Yeah, I mean, that might be, you know, certainly some operating systems are more stringent than others, and they keep a tighter control of what can be shown, and others that are more open. So some of it is going to fall, some of it's going to fall to users to really monitor, and turn off notifications, do those things, which sucks, but it's going to be hard to stem the tide of people being like, but my notification is awesome, like screw the Apple one, or so that's hard. Yeah, I don't have a good real response to it, except I hope that there is some restraint on the part of our community to be reasonable about using what's already built in, and only changing it when there's something really special, to use standards as much as possible for microinteractions.
I think in a way that's where the app notification center in iOS came. Having a littering of notifications across the screen, you could put them in a single place, but
yeah,
it still has its drawbacks. One thing that made me think of was when you have notifications or micro-interactions that are repeated across multiple sources. For instance, when I get an invitation to connect on LinkedIn, I get both a notification of a new email from my mail client as well as one from Gmail or from LinkedIn. And
right.
Having them talk to each other, having some communication between the two apps that says, no, I'm already aware of this, I don't have to clear it in multiple places. That would certainly help stem the tide of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great rule, that's behind the scenes. Has this been read on any other place? Great. If it has, done. I mean, that'd be fantastic.
So when you design these micro interactions, like, do you have ever run into a condition like when you do the testing, the quantitative result and user delight is choosing one direction, and the business metric and the tracking and user data tracking is going in another direction? On one hand, you feel like, oh, we should design based on facts, but also you also knowing you cannot measure everything. So how you kind of like make that trade-off?
I mean, well, it's basically all about what your tolerance is for collecting data. I mean, if you really want to get deep into it, I mean, I know places that set up, tracking events on every single click, every single drop down, they can break a micro interaction apart into 5 different pieces and track every flow through it. And sometimes that's valuable. Like sometimes you can, there are things that you wouldn't be able to tell qualitatively. Like everyone would be like, yeah, I love this. And then when you actually see the data, it's like, well, no one actually is clicking on this. Like nobody really loves it. Or you can see where there's like drop-off points and stuff like that, things that don't work well. And sometimes you can only see that at these massive kind of scales. But then, then again, I mean, it's because I work at a consultancy, so we only get to do that occasionally. I mean, more often we're doing a lot of quantitative analysis where it's like, or usability testing with small numbers of people. So sometimes it's just like, yeah, but that's the tolerance for data that a lot of our clients are okay with. They're like, 20 people like this, let's try it. Let's put it up, and then if it bombs, we can adjust it. So I think it just all depends on what your appetite for it is, because you can go nuts. So is that it?
Yeah, if that's it, we'll say thank you very much.
So this is interesting. There's the first chapter is up at Microinteractions, and part of chapter 4 all about slot machines. So all up at Microinteractions. So thanks for coming. Appreciate it.